So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our webinar of Reimagining Loyalty, where we're going to be discussing everything to do with customer loyalty, looking at the key driving factors behind this and how customer loyalty is changing in 2021 and beyond. My name is Hannah and I'm the marketing manager here, and I'm joined today by my colleague Keith, who's the research director, and he'll be presenting the findings today. All of which will also be included within our next report, which will be available for you to download following the webinar as well. We'll also be doing a few polls throughout the webinar, so just look out for those to pop up onto your screen. And please do feel free to send through any questions that you may have via the Q&A button on your toolbar at the bottom of the screen. Before I hand you over to Keith, just going to kick off with the first poll. So that will just be appearing on your screen now. It's actually multiple choice, so please feel free to choose as many options as you'd like. And then we can kick off, and I'll hand you over to Keith.
Thanks very much, Hannah. And hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us this morning. This webinar should take around 35 to 40 minutes, so we'll be able to have a brief Q&A at the end if needed, and still give you guys enough time to grab a coffee in time for your 12 o'clock meetings. In our report, which you will receive a copy of, we will explore brand loyalty, and particularly the current view of it in the eyes of the consumer. We will firstly take a look at what loyalty actually means in the current environment, how and if customer loyalty as a concept is changing in 2021 and beyond, and finally taking a look at the role of sustainability and charitable giving, or CSR policies, in the adoption of brand loyalty. But we'll start with a pretty obvious one. Just what does customer loyalty mean? Well, at its most simplistic, it's about faithfulness and commitment. Loyalty in all walks of life is measured on one's desire to remain or side with a particular person or entity. The word loyalty doesn't have a different meaning in a customer or business context. However, allegiances are formed, broken, and reimagined in a much faster way in the world of business. Customer loyalty can be defined as the commitment from customers to continue purchasing from a company based on the benefits received from those purchases, whether that be price, quality of product, benefits, or rewards. The more value and intrinsic and extrinsic benefits a customer receives, the more likely they are to both shop with that company in the future and evangelize to others. This report will review the drivers of customer loyalty and take a measure to define true customer loyalty. We asked in that rep sample of UK adults to complete an online questionnaire about their attitudes towards loyalty. And what's certainly clear is that in 2021, loyalty works both ways. It's no longer a simple data harvesting exercise for brands. Instead, consumers are much more choosy in how they interact with brands, and real tangible benefits and reward for loyalty should be valued above all else. The loyalty mechanic as we know it is slowly being changed and diversified in favour of engendering true customer loyalty, which we'll come on to in a bit. Customer loyalty already had a deep-rooted need to be redefined in the last few years, with so many unused loyalty points and schemes on the high street. But in 2020, and since the pandemic hit, consumers have rediscovered the power of community. As mentioned on the previous slide, in the mind of a consumer in 2021, loyalty does indeed work both ways. In fact, as you can see, only 1% of people disagree that brand loyalty exists. So in one way, shape or form, brand loyalty is perceived, understood and imagined by almost everyone. True brand loyalty doesn't need a mechanic or program, and the key drivers to return this must be understood. And consistent with previous research that we've conducted into the loyalty marketplace, we will see that quality, trust, and reliability are more important than discounts, price, and benefits. As a result, loyalty schemes are deeply embedded in the psyche of the consumer, and in certain areas they are indeed expected. Whilst the grocery and food and drink sectors are the most obvious place to find loyalty schemes across all respondents, younger demographics are similarly likely to have loyalty schemes across fashion, entertainment, beauty, and luxury brands. But aside from the definition of customer loyalty, what are the most important factors for a consumer to stay loyal to a brand? Now, in previous research, we have discussed the importance of personalization and trust being a key to success in creating a compelling customer experience. We already know that loyal customers are worth more to a business. An increase, for example, of just 5 to 10% in customer retention can and does increase a company's profitability by up to 75%. They cost less to service, they promote on your behalf, and are more resistant to a competitor's advances. And we can see from these three key drivers of brand loyalty and a couple of open-ended quotes from the research that by getting the basics right, the job is already on a path to success. Earlier on at the start of the webinar, we asked you in a poll, when thinking about loyalty, which of the following are the most important aspects for staying loyal to a brand? Hannah, can we have a wee look at the answers, please? So you can see there reliability, quality, and trust were clearly the winners from everyone that played there. So obviously you've got a good understanding of how the marketplace is set already. So thank you very much for that. And it is an interesting set of answers with those are the top three choices list. So it's very closely aligned with the research findings. But the population actually in order tell us that the following set of results are most important. So in fact, the percentages were remarkably close as well. So the purpose of brand loyalty hasn't changed from a business perspective. Its main aim being to collect information about customers and stimulate behaviours that encourage retention. However, without getting the basic aspects of a brand or consumer relationship right, enhanced loyalty mechanics won't be able to gain the traction and sentiment they intend. High quality products and services at 81% of the base. Reliability of the brand or business that consumers are purchasing from also at 81%. And the trust that engenders in a consumer at 80% are clearly the most important aspects in creating a feeling of loyalty. So quality, trust, and reliability, things that don't require a loyalty program or a mechanic to curate. None of these measures are ones that can be solved by loyalty schemes, rather are a measure of true loyalty that can be engendered regardless of whether or not a mechanic is offered by a brand. However, the likelihood of success in membership, reward, and loyalty programs is also dependent on the target consumer market. And different mechanics resonate with, for example, the opposing sexes. What we can see here is that males are more likely than females. So it's 21% of males versus 14% of females to have a membership rewards account, such as American Express. Whereas females are more likely to go for points-based rewards cards, such as the Boots Advantage card or Tesco Club card. That's 77% of females versus 70% of males. However, it's not just in men and women where we see key differences. We also observe a generational difference in behaviours towards these mechanics. Now, there is quite a difference in the generations, not just in number of loyalty schemes each group has in total, but also the type of schemes that they have. Here, we observe that Gen Zs, for example, are much less likely to have a points-based rewards card like Boots Advantage or Tesco Club card, but actually are more likely to have a discount rewards card, which suggests that brands are going to have a little bit of a rethink around their loyalty models to resonate more with the customers of tomorrow. You will read in the report about the segments and sectors that have the highest and lowest uptakes of loyalty schemes, which ones feel they have a need to have a scheme and which prefer the emergence of genuine organic loyalty. These sectors, whilst not necessarily synonymous with loyalty schemes, have the most coveted loyalty of all, and that's an almost evangelical following. Many people are hugely loyal to a specific sports brand, car manufacturer, or fashion house, and one of the most obvious reasons for this is simply that they, more often than not, offer a very specific and unique product, service, or entertainment which isn't easily replicated. But just what are the mechanics of brand loyalty? Now, on the face of it, it's very obvious that customer loyalty isn't driven by magic. It's driven by organisations that are highly effective operationally, have high performance marketing strategies, and are able to implement highly creative communications with consumers in a way that resonates with their target audience. Hitting all these metrics above is one of several keys to success. Now, putting this into context, among some of the best known loyalty schemes in the UK, which of them are likely to over-index on the above sentiments? Again, this is something which we explore in more detail in the paper, which you'll receive a copy of shortly. But as we've seen earlier, loyalty and loyalty scheme sign-ups are increasingly less likely to be perfunctory actions as the population to which these types of scheme were new and novel ages and gets older. It's now much more of a two-way street. A significantly more considered approach is being undertaken by the younger Gen Z and millennial consumers who have access to much more readily available information about organisations, as well as being significantly more aware, protective and savvy about the data and information that they are willing to share. Hannah, if you wouldn't mind, we're going to have a second poll now. When thinking about loyalty incentives, which of the following categories do you have? Select all of the options that you currently or have had recently, and we'll come back to that shortly. Now, aside from the mechanics of loyalty, societal impact and recent behavioural change will undoubtedly have had an impact on customer retention and acquisition for companies. After a hugely challenging year as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, many organisations are having to go the extra length to rekindle the love that was previously shared by consumers. Habitual behaviour is endemic in society, and with the closure of stores, airports and hotels, hospitality venues, workplaces and sporting arenas, much of the previously built up loyalty has to be regained by those organisations. Moreover, with changing behaviours, including the population spending more time at home than ever before, there has been a significant movement in the area that is beginning to align itself much more with younger consumers. So, when we take a closer look at these behaviours, we can see that these behaviours look set to continue into the future. In grocery, for example, the Co-op group has reached its highest market share for almost 20 years in attracting 1.7 million new households in 2020 since the onset of the pandemic, with the average basket size doubling and online orders rising fourfold. The local element here is obviously critical. So donating £15 million, for example, to local community causes while spending in excess of £97 million in responding to the pandemic has fostered a reputation of community spirit and engagement that many of the larger players in the grocery sector just simply aren't nimble enough to match. Across all sectors, a rising desire for experiential, societal interactions and membership subscriptions are highlighting a fundamental shift away from points and/or discount-based loyalty mechanics. Taking information from sources such as the IPA, Mark Ritson and the Ehrenberg Bass Institute, we see that traditional loyalty programs actually have a weak effect on loyalty. Their aim primarily is to get more, less frequent customers to become more loyal. In reality, what happens is that the heaviest users of the product, also known as the best customers, are more likely to see these programs, mainly due to more frequent interaction with that brand, and are therefore more likely to engage with loyalty schemes, as they've got the most to gain as existing high-frequency users. There is, of course, somewhat of an uplift in less loyal customers, but it's not transformational. And so the best way to grow is through organic loyalty and market penetration. There are exceptions to this rule in 2021. Certain niche businesses, and very specifically subscription and membership models, which we'll touch upon in the report. But of the programs that do exist, which are the best performing mechanisms? So we asked you a couple of minutes ago which types of loyalty programs, incentives or schemes that you had. So let's see how you guys compared with what the population most have. So Hannah, can you show us the results, please? Thank you. So you can see there that the number one performing scheme there was the points-based rewards account, which we will see as the #1 across the nation, and subscription-based account was placed in 3rd place there with 37%. So again, another interesting set of answers, but quite closely aligned to the research findings. The population actually tells us that following set of loyalty programs, incentives or schemes are the most popular. So the traditional points-based rewards account is, of course, the #1 mechanism in terms of adults signed up to each of these types of incentive schemes. It's hardly surprising, and it has been around the longest. However, there are large variances between age ranges. So, for example, over 80% of adults aged over 40 have one of these, yet only 45% of the younger age ranges, specifically the Gen Zs, do, suggesting a changing behaviour. And the reverse is true of those proportions of the populations that have other types, including discount reward cards and account. Also, in our research, we have found that a significant 50% of the adult population have their own subscription-based account services, for example, Netflix, Gusto, Beer52, and the likes. And this is most consistently high across the 25 to 54-year-old age range, but is consistent across all ages. Not only is it high in number, but as you will see in the report, it's one of the most consistently engaged with services of its type across the generational spectrum. We are seeing an explosive growth in subscription and membership models across a variety of sectors over and above the traditional thought ones of entertainment, with examples such as Beauty Pie, Brewdog and Friends, Dollar Shave Club, HelloFresh, Small, Pret and More, for example, providing examples of this across differing sectors. Generally speaking, though, the cost to acquire a subscriber is generally significantly higher than other avenues. However, in general, they will still deliver a higher lifetime value. So that cost to recruit subscribers is often quite high, and most retailers can overestimate their ability to cross-sell into other service areas. So for organisations thinking of moving into this area, there are some considerations to be cautious about. But over and above that, equally as important is how consumers want to be communicated with. So everyone wants an app, right? Well, simply a good proportion of consumers do. However, it is by no means the most preferred method of being notified of loyalty rewards. Email is by far and away the most preferred method of communication. Perhaps this is because consumers want to make decisions when they are ready and on their terms, as opposed to being informed frequently through push notifications. So let's look at an organisation, an example of a company that's getting this right. So this is looking at Bloom and Wild. So you can see an example of an organisation doing it well are Bloom and Wild, the florists. Now, there are a number of desired offerings which you can read on the screen there, and that's, for example, discounts for repeat business, NHS and key worker discounts, personalised and thoughtful pieces like offering an opt-out to Father's Day and Mother's Day communications, and an incentive to signing up to newsletters. However, what sets Bloom and Wild apart isn't just that they offer, isn't just what they offer on their own mechanic. It's around their customer centricity, and this is particularly well evidenced by looking, for example, at their reviews on Trustpilot. An average score of 4.8 out of 5 across almost 32,000 reviews is something that many businesses would dearly love to have. So not only are they getting the mechanic right, they also have the three most important basics of trust, reliability, and quality down to a T. Now, moving on to our final section, we wanted to have a look in our research at the role sustainability and charitable giving has in engendering consumer loyalty. Attitudes are changing towards brands, and over and above the metrics mentioned in previous pages, we wonder, is sustainability and charitable giving also an important aspect of loyalty? Feelings are different here, and that depends on a number of factors, but it is a trend that is growing across all areas. 63% of the population agree that when thinking about loyalty, sustainability, for example, ethically centred brands, recycled packaging, zero carbon emissions, and so on, is an important aspect in staying loyal to a brand, and notably more so amongst females. 70% of females agreeing to this versus just 56% of males. And the same can be observed in charitable giving, with 55% of the population feeling that this is an important aspect in brand loyalty. And again, that's 60% of females agreeing with that versus 51% of males. Now, interestingly, despite differences in approach by the sexes to sustainability and charitable giving, there's very little difference in attitudes towards these approaches amongst age ranges. The most notable exception being the strength of sentiment towards these factors, with younger audiences much more likely to strongly agree with these aspects and older consumers being much more likely to somewhat agree, which is a sure indicator of a growing area of importance and interest for consumers. Now, according to Work, top of mind associations with sustainability have changed over the last 18 months, partly lockdown induced. Reducing CO2 emissions is now the primary association for these consumers, having grown to 19% to push ahead of recycling programs and issues around single-use plastics. As concerns about climate change grow, some brands are using claims around carbon footprints and CO2 emissions as a new currency of sorts. Brewdog are an obvious example of this, with both their website and Brewdog and Friends subscription model leading with a carbon negative beer strapline. For every beer we remove, twice as much carbon from the air as we emit is their claim. Consumers regard retailers, and supermarkets especially, as being in the lead when it comes to communicating around sustainability. A majority of people say they are willing to pay more for sustainable brands, but many wonder why they should have to, which is a valid observation. And as we move into economic recovery, coinciding with new behaviours and priorities in consumers' lives, it's more important than ever that brands embrace sustainability and charitable giving as part of their loyalty schemes. So, just for some final thoughts on our presentation today and some overarching thoughts to take away. An impressive 99% of the UK population believes in brand loyalty in some way, shape or form. So loyalty plans shouldn't be put on hold or be a thing of the past, certainly, just tweaked for future audiences. Quality, trust and reliability are generally those aspects regarded by consumers with their definition of brand loyalty. None of these measures are ones that can be solved by loyalty schemes. Rather, they are a measure of true loyalty that can be engendered regardless of whether or not a mechanic is offered. Subscription and membership models, either wholly or in part, are here to stay. They are driving significant growth in several sectors and are making their way to more traditional high street retailers and sectors. However, when considering moving into these circles, attention and care should be given around acquisition costs and retention abilities. And sustainability and charitable giving are important to consumers across all walks of life and should be communicated as such. However, the passionate advocacy in these areas is growing, and as younger audiences move into the mainstream, proof of these credentials will be demanded rather than desired. So in conclusion, as we've seen in our previous loyalty pieces, loyalty programs do not drive true loyalty. They offer benefits that might influence behaviour, but cannot encourage positive attitudes, long-lasting relationships and ongoing loyalty without first offering brand love, trust and perceived quality. So to finish off, it's worth remembering that customer loyalty is as old as the concept of business itself. So bear this closing quotation in mind when considering your next move in customer loyalty. So that's us at the end of the webinar now, and thank you very much for joining us today. As Hannah mentioned at the start of the session, this webinar is a snapshot of our report, Reimagining Loyalty, which is being released imminently. You will receive a copy of the report direct to your inboxes, but if any of your colleagues would like a copy of it, it will of course be available to download on our website. So I'll finish up now and pass over to Hannah, where we've got 5 or 10 minutes if there are any questions.
Perfect. Thanks for that, Keith. Yeah, we do actually have a few questions that have come through. So one of them is, do you think loyalty incentives will be a thing of the past based on the rise of subscription services and their low price point and potentially high satisfaction rates, such as Netflix and Amazon Prime?
No, I don't think they will be a thing of the past, and I think that's probably for a variety of reasons. Loyalty mechanics are different for different industries, and they are industry specific. And I think where loyalty mechanics or traditional loyalty mechanics will continue to be strong and grow is in industries where they are highly competitive. Or samey, as we might say. A good example of that being the grocery sector. You know, the top 4 supermarkets all sell the same thing, and they sell them at a similar price point, and therefore the differentiators are generally down to things like loyalty mechanics and the geographies of where they're based. But it's also worth remembering that subscription mechanics are a loyalty mechanic at their very base. They are there to primarily engender repeat business, to keep people coming back and to stop them going to other competitors. And whilst traditionally they are the realm of online-based businesses, food and drink, for example, and or entertainment packages like Netflix and so on, we're starting to see that become a much more stronger way, and it's actually a change of the mechanic towards slightly different ways of doing things, rather than loyalty mechanics becoming a thing of the past, which I think is probably the closer answer to it.
Okay, great. We've got another one here that says, what impact do you think one negative customer experience could have on a brand loyalty, and how can brands avoid this?
A lot, I think, is probably. I think I remember reading relatively recently that it takes about, I think it's 40 odd positive customer experiences to undo the damage of a single negative review that's posted online. So I think really there's only one solution to that, and that is that if a single bad review can undo the value of 40 good customer experiences, then the best solution should, I guess, obviously be to focus on customer satisfaction. So if it isn't already, then customer happiness should be just as important to a business as the product or service itself. So the 3 keys to customer happiness, I think we've already mentioned in the webinar today, of those 3 keywords of quality, trust, and reliability. And I think ultimately, if a business gets those 3 things right, then they're mitigating all they can, barring exceptional circumstances, to have those negative reviews.
Great. A couple of more questions. So with the difference in gender, do retailers need to get better with segmented approaches to loyalty?
Yes, I think they do. I think we see in very specific terms, and again, you'll read more about this in the report, that males and females have a lot of similarities in many ways. However, there are some critical differences in how they're likely to engage from a loyalty perspective with businesses. There are certain mechanics that are more appealing to males than they are to females, and vice versa. However, when we look at things like what I mentioned earlier on in the webinar about American Express, type organizations for males to sign up to, it's still worth mentioning that it is only 1/5 of the population that have an account like that, versus those that have points-based rewards cards are significantly higher. So I think for me, it's more around the personalization and segmentation of the communication strategies to get them involved, and more communicating what they can do specific to the male and female audience with those particular points-based systems and platforms. Where it was interesting for me, though, was that there's a large difference in the sentiment of males and females towards towards corporate social responsibility measures such as sustainability, carbon emissions, charitable giving, so on and so forth. And the female audience being significantly more likely to align themselves with that, but also the younger generations being a lot more likely to be seriously, strongly agreeing with these things. So for me, it's not about necessarily having different mechanics for the different sexes. I think it's more about personalizing the communications to ensure that each mechanic is getting what they want and what they need out of those systems.
Amazing. And then we've got another question that says, do you think that the sustainability narrative will catch on?
It's a really good question, and I often wonder that one myself. What frustrates me a little bit as a consumer sometimes, and I guess maybe I'm just a little bit critical of, cast a critical eye on these things sometimes, is that the amount of businesses that are using sustainability as a sales message, as opposed to something that should be taken as a positive advancement, as a given across the industry. So I think there are certain product types and there are certain industries where it's easier to convey the sustainability message. But what's important for me is, in order for sustainability to become the norm or for it to become the mainstream, it has to be priced attractively. And I think one of the biggest problems that you have in certain sectors, particularly things like the grocery sector, for example, is if we're looking at sustainable business, how can Tesco or Sainsbury's or Asda or whoever on one hand be spending millions of pounds talking about their sustainability messaging, but on the other hand selling products with really high amounts of plastic materials, for example, lots of packaging, but also from the mind of a consumer, the majority consumer in this United Kingdom is likely to go for the cheapest option in many circumstances, whether that be with chicken or whether that be with pasta products or whatever it might be. And generally speaking, the mass farmed, not very sustainable industries tend to be the ones that are priced lowest. And therefore, in order for sustainability to become front and center and to become an accepted norm of society, you would expect a lot of other things to have to align at the same time, such as animal welfare, reduction in plastic, alignment of pricing policies, and so on and so forth. So yes, in short, I think it will happen eventually, but sadly, I think we're quite a long way off that being the normality due to some of the big players in the market.
Yeah, and then we've just got one more question that's come in. It says, how important do you think it is for brands to harness their community in scoping out their loyalty strategy?
Hugely. I think ultimately your customers, your customers are the single biggest piece of intelligence that you could possibly have, and in many instances, there are brands and businesses that are sitting on a veritable goldmine of insight and intelligence that they just don't know what to do with, or they don't have a clear joined up strategy around about it. So obviously you can look at it from a number of different perspectives. It's not just about if we look at it from a brand perspective, very often when they have customer databases, the thing that they always want to test is just what do customers think about my brand, my product, my service, as in CSAT measures or net promoter score measures or anything along those lines. However, in many instances, don't forget there are 101 other things you can find out about your customers to help you shape your potential market, your retention strategies, and indeed your acquisition strategies a little bit better. So that's finding out more information about things like share of wallet, things like competitor intelligence, things like lifestyle habits and statements that perform a function of allowing you to profile and segment your customers in a more meaningful way, so that rather than just saying our top customer base is 25 to 35-year-old ABC ones who live within a 30-mile radius of London, that's just not enough for you to be able to effectively personalize your communications and get the most out of them and understand them. So by doing proper customer profiling or segmentation exercises, for example, it allows you to kind of complete a bit of a day in the life of our consumers. Why is it our consumers are 40% more likely to buy our product between 7 p.m. and 9 p.m. at night. You don't know that without asking them, or even in some cases doing some quality research with them. So that might be it could be a simple case of, well, the website's quieter at that time of day, or they're home from work. But equally, on the other hand, it could be, well, our audience is actually significantly more likely to be a family audience, and therefore they consider the purchase during the day. But actually they wait until they've had their dinner, they put their kids to bed, they sit down, they open a bottle of wine, have a drink and go, right, we're going to go and buy that flight to, Spain for next year now, or whatever it might be. So there's a whole load of behavioral things that you can learn from your customers. And by having that at your fingertips, relatively cost effectively, really quickly, and with some considered thought, you can completely change your marketing strategy by getting some extra insight out of that.
Okay, great. Do you just have one last question? It says here, how impactful do you think it is to do smaller activations, such as sending out a gift or hosting a small event, rather than having a loyalty program as such? That way people are still rewarded, but it's unexpected and exciting when they do receive invites to events or gifts.
It's a really good question, and I think from a customer loyalty perspective, the words surprise and delight are always popular. I think I use an example of a client. I used to do some work with SSE, the energy supplier, and they have their SSE reward platform, and it is a simple case of, if you're an SSE customer, you sign up and you get priority access to tickets at the arena in London or the SSE Hydro in Glasgow or wherever it might be. But sometimes you get access to the pre-sale, sometimes you don't, and it's one of those kind of things. But occasionally what they do is when you turn up at the arena on the night, they just randomly pick people to get upgraded into the hospitality lounges, or to get backstage passes, or sometimes the odd meet and greet with the artists and things like that. So those things were completely unannounced, unscripted and everything else. And we always did some Vox Pop interviews when that kind of stuff happened, with the people that got it, to see what they think. And you can tell by reactions on people just what a difference that has over and above a loyalty mechanic. So very much so, yes, it's a thing to do, but it's also worth bearing in mind it depends on whoever it was that submitted the question. It also depends on what sector they work in, or where they come from. There are certain places where surprise and delight is much easier to achieve than it is in others. So harder to do surprise and delight if you work for a bank, for example, than it is if you run an online craft beer business, for example, where you can just drop a few cans to their doorstep as a thank you. So my best answer to that would probably be a little bit of a mix of both, but certainly from the soundbite perspective and stuff that you can use where customers will really start to wax lyrical and evangelize about your organization, those small, little, well thought out and comfy things are stuff that will make a really big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as well, doing the small activations, that kind of leads back into creating a community as well. Yeah,
I think so. And I mean, obviously you've got some experience of doing some events in the luxury sector yourself, and you can see how the impact that these things have on potential customers. But rather than it just necessarily being about researching and understanding your customers better, you use the word community there. So the community spirit is so important, more so now than it has been in a long time, many people would argue. So insight communities are so valuable. If you have a customer database with 10,000 people on it, or however many people you've got on it, set up an insight community, because you can then start to have a readily available on-tap resource of engaged customers that can answer these questions left, right, and centre. And we've done that with a variety of consumers. I've recently done one with Flavourly, the online craft beer supplier, and we created something called the Flavourly Brain with them. And it's basically an online community where we send them out new beers, for example, that are just coming online, ask people to taste them, come on and do video taste tests with us, rate them, share more information about them, and give us some quality interviews. So having an insight community allows you to not only do quant polls and snapshot surveys and things like that, it also allows you to really get under the skin of how people feel about your product and service when they have it in their hand, or how they feel about things like the delivery process and getting it from door to door, and customer satisfaction and stuff like that too. So if you've got that on hand, you don't need to have a platform that costs £100,000 a year to run a community like this. You can do it in a pretty straightforward, simple and meaningful way without it costing you the earth. And whilst you've got it on tap, I suggest you use it.
Yeah. Perfect. Well, thanks very much for that, Keith, and for everyone's time today. As Keith said, we'll be releasing the Reimagining Loyalty report soon, so please do look out for that. And we'll also be sending out a feedback survey as well. So any thoughts that you have on today's webinar would be greatly appreciated, and any thoughts on other topics that you're interested in would also be great to know. Yeah, thanks again, and have a lovely rest of the day.
Thanks very much.
Bye.